Battle with the Philistines. Saul chose for himself 3,000 men from the men of Israel. 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and on the mountain of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. He sent the rest of the people away, each man to his dwelling. And Jonathan smote Nazib the Philistine who dwelt in the hill, and the Philistines heard of it. Then Saul blew the trumpet throughout all the land, saying, The servants have rejected us. All Israel heard it said that Saul smote Nazib the Philistine. Now Israel had been put to shame before the Philistines, and the people cried out after Saul at Gilgal. Then the Philistines gathered to fight with Israel. 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen came up against Israel, and as many troops as the sand on the seashore. And they came up and encamped in Michmash opposite Beth-aven southward. When the men of Israel saw they were in danger, they did not draw near. Instead the people hid in caves, in holes, in rocks, in trenches, and in pits. They even crossed the river Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul's unlawful offering. Saul was still in Gilgal, and all the people standing with him were confused. Then Saul waited, as Samuel had said, for 7 days for a testimony. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and his people scattered from him. So Saul said, Bring me a sacrifice so I may offer the whole burnt offering and peace offering, and he offered the whole burnt offering. And it came to pass, when he finished presenting the burnt offering, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him so that Samuel might bless him. Then Samuel said, What have you done? And Saul said, When I saw the people scatter from me, and you did not come within the days of testimony as you arranged, and the Philistines gathered at Michmash, then I said, The Philistines will now come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not prayed in the presence of the Lord. Therefore I forced myself, and I offered a burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, You have rendered it vain because you did not keep my commandments, which the Lord commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not stand. The Lord will seek a man for himself after his own heart, and the Lord will appoint him to be ruler for his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. Then Samuel arose and departed from Gilgal, and the remnant of the people followed behind Saul to join with the men of war. And when they arrived from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin, Saul numbered the people with him, about 600 men. Saul, Jonathan his son, and the people with them remained in Gibeah of Benjamin and wept. But the Philistines encamped in Michmash. And the troops came out of the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies, one company turned by way of Ophir toward the land of Shual. Another company turned by way of Beth Horon, and another company turned by way of Gibeah, overlooking the valley of Zeboim. Now there was not a blacksmith to be found throughout all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, Lest the Hebrews make swords or spears. Thus all Israel went down to the land of the Philistines to forge each man's plowshare into his light armor, his tool, his axe, and his sickle. It was near the time of the harvest, and 3 shekels is the value of a plowshare, and the same value for the axes and the sickles. And it came about in the days of the Michmash war, there was neither sword nor spear to be found in the hand of any of the troops with Saul and Jonathan. But they were found with Saul and Jonathan his son. and they went out from the land of the Philistines to the place beyond Michmash. Jonathan defeats the Philistines. Now it happened one day that Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young servant, carrying his armor, "Come here. Let us cross over to that other side, into the outpost of the Philistine garrison." But he did not tell his father of this. Now Saul sat on the top of the hill under a pomegranate tree on the hill in Migron. There were about 600 men with him. And Ahijah the son of Ahitub, brother of Ichabod son of Phinehas, son of Eli the priest of the Lord in Shiloh, was wearing the ephod. But the people did not know Jonathan had left. In the midst of the passage by which Jonathan sought to travel over to the encampment of the Philistines, there was a sharp rock on one side and a sharp rock on the other. The name of one was Bozez, and the name of the other Seneh. The one faced northward opposite Michmash, and the other southward opposite Gibeah. Then Jonathan said to his young servant carrying his armor, "Come, let us cross over into the outpost of these uncircumcised men, if by chance the Lord will do something for us, for the Lord is not constrained to deliver by the many or by the few." So his armor-bearer said to him, "Do everything toward which your heart inclines. Behold, I am with you as your heart is my heart." Then Jonathan said, "Very well, let us cross over to these men, and we will come down over them from the hill Nineveh. They should say to us, 'You there, withdraw until we send for you,' then we will stand by ourselves and will not go up against them. But if they say thus, 'Come up to us,' then we will go up, for the Lord has delivered them into our hands. This will be a sign to us." When both of them went up to the Philistine garrison, the Philistines said, "Look, the Hebrews came out of the holes they dug, where they hid themselves." Then the men of the garrison called to Jonathan and his armor-bearer and said, "Come against us and we will show you something." Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "Come up after I do, for the Lord has delivered them into the hands of Israel." Then Jonathan, with his armor-bearer after him, went up on his hands and knees. They looked upon the face of Jonathan, and he struck them. Even his armor-bearer killed them. This was the first slaughter Jonathan and his armor-bearer made, taking 20 men with arrows and slings and pebbles of the field. Bewilderment came over the army camp and in the field. All the troops in the garrison, and those being utterly destroyed, were in a state of shock and could not act. The land was astounded, and bewilderment came from the Lord. Now the watchmen of Saul looked, and behold, from here it was seen that the opposing army was having trouble, and Saul said to the people with him, "Number yourselves now, and see who has gone out from us." And they made a roll call, and Jonathan and his armor-bearer were not found. And Saul said to Ahijah, "Bring the ephod here." For on that day the ephod was raised up in the presence of Israel. Now it happened as Saul spoke to the priest, that the noise in the camp of the Philistines became louder. So Saul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hands." Then Saul and all the people with him cried aloud, and they went into battle. Indeed, every man's sword was against the enemy next to him. There was great confusion. And the slaves who were with the Philistines before that time and went up with them to the camp changed loyalties and joined the Israelites, along with Saul and Jonathan. Likewise all the men of Israel hidden in the mountains of Ephraim, when they heard the Philistines had fled, followed hard after them in battle. On that day, the Lord saved Israel. Notes from the previous page. 12:6-25 Samuel's sermon expounds on the grace and deliverance of God in the life of Israel. Though a king in Israel was a concession from God, Samuel encourages them that the monarchy will work if both they and the king continue in God's righteousness. 13:13 Hilary of Poitiers sees David's commendation by God as a man after his own heart as a glimpse into the prophetic ministry of David. Although David lived under the Mosaic law, he prophetically grasped the fullness of the gospel fulfilled ultimately in Christ.